Hello, fellow time travelers. I'm Tony Whitt with the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the podcast in which we undertake the insert adjective here task of discussing in story order all of the Doctor Who novelizations. I'm joined by
Dalton Hughes
and by
Alison Fitz-Seyfried,
and we record our episodes twice a month. You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Enjoy your travels.
Welcome back to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. I am Larry Van Mersbergen, your host, and I have been collecting Doctor Who memorabilia since 1981. Now, this may change from previous episodes because I've uncovered some documents in my collection that actually put my great idea to mid-1984. I had this idea to start a Doctor Who store, which was problematic on two fronts. Number one, I was 15 years old and couldn't drive anywhere, and two, I had no money. But I did it anyway. And in a very short period of time, in mid-1985, I actually gained a partner, had a legal partnership, a catalog that was that went national, and a very thriving Doctor Who business. I sold that business in 1989 to a very good friend of mine who kept it going. Anyway, I found it many years later. I discovered it was a part of Doctor Who history. It is mentioned in a book called Red, White, and Who, the story of Doctor Who in America. It's written by some wonderful people, and Bundles from Britain lives on page 384. It is by ATB Publishing. You can get it direct from the publisher or from anywhere you buy your books. Another podcast I'd like to mention is the Target Book Club podcast, currently on hiatus, hosted by Tony Whitt, and it's also available on iTunes and everywhere podcasts are found. I was a guest when we talked about The Mind of Evil and The Day of the Daleks, so be sure to tune into those episodes as well as all of them. They are wonderful. The group that discusses the Target books in story order is quite an undertaking since they were not published in story order. Our theme song is Who's Doctor Who by Barry Mason and Les Reed, performed by Fraser Hines, who played Jamie McCrimmon in over 113 Doctor Who episodes. Makes him the longest-running character, and he's a friend of the podcast. Consider becoming a friend of the podcast. We would like to ask you for your help. Publishing a podcast takes more than just talent and research and having information to share with you and the items that are here to talk about and the items that are coming out to talk about. So for as little as $5 a month, you can help the podcast with equipment needs, subscriptions, and to keep us on the air. You can do it one of two ways. You can do it on our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, where you can listen to the podcast knowing with full satisfaction that you've contributed. You could also find us at Podbean at www.podbean.com, and you can find our podcast there and also patronize us on Podbean. It's a really wonderful way to support Doctor Who and the podcast area. We're also a proud member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance. You can check out more great Doctor Who podcasts at drwhopodcastalliance.org.
Sad, really, isn't it? People spend all that time making nice things, and other people come along and break them.
Collection protection. Before I start collection protection, I wanted to say we did wrap up a wonderful live podcast at Chicago TARDIS 2019. We had a wonderful time with our guests David J. Howe and Samantha Stone, along with Tony Whitt. That podcast With anything doing live, we weren't even sure we were being recorded. The audio had a little trouble the first time around. You might have heard echo if you first listened to it, but we've replaced it with a much cleaner copy, and it sounds pretty good. And we were able to show some things to the audience, and we had some audience participation, and we had a giveaway. So it was a lot of fun. So I'm going to keep up with that. I do have a giveaway. I talked about the unofficial 1972 annual in a previous podcast, and coming soon I will be discussing the 1987 unofficial annual. I have a copy of the 1987 unofficial annual that I would like to give away to a random subscriber. Subscribe to us on Podbean or Patreon by December 31st, and I will draw a name for the first January podcast recording, and they will receive a copy of the 1987 unofficial annual. So for collection protection today, I want to talk about your art prints, your certificates, your old catalogs, things that don't fall into a normal bag or you want them to be displayed. I discovered Art Pro frames at Amazon.com. I have a Palatoy talking Dalek poster, which you will see on our Facebook page. I used it at my collecting panel. And I found a frame that fitted perfectly, along with a classic t-shirt. There are t-shirt frames, and an art print that I have from the front cover of the 1972 January 1 Radio Times, where Day of the Daleks premiered. And so that's an important thing to keep, in your Who collection. If you're displaying things, have them in a nice frame that reflect light and don't allow the item to fade in the frame. So that's Art Pro frames. You can find those at Amazon.com. And by the way, any other types of collecting stories, any collection protection stories, you can find us at Facebook and Twitter at Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. You can shoot us an email at drwhocollectorspodcast@gmail.com or visit our website at drwhocollectors.com. Don't forget to leave out podcast for the website.
Up there is the scanner, those are the doors, that is a chair with a panda on it. Sheer poetry, dear boy.
Our main story. It's time for the November merchandise roundup. A lot of things were released on all fronts in November, and I'm not going to talk about all of them, so I've decided to do a little bit of a kind of a roundup. I picked some things to talk about. The first I want to talk about was just most recently that came out, going backwards, was the Mr. Men, Little Miss Doctor 13th cushion and the Mr. Men, Little Miss Doctor Who 11th cushion. They are little cushiony puppets of Jodie Whittaker and Matt Smith. They're kind of cute, and you can actually get those at Amazon.co.uk, and they're available to order. The cushions measure in centimeters, 40 by 26 by 40, and you can see pictures of those on the Amazon UK site. The other thing I'd like to talk about here is the, here we go. Oh yes, of course, I mentioned this already, but just to give a little mention, the unofficial Doctor Who Annual 1987, which I will be devoting a podcast to in depth, but it came out on November 24th, which is right after the anniversary of Doctor Who. 122 pages from Terraqueous Distributors, and it includes illustrations by fans as well as celebrity contributions from Fraser Hines, Alistair Pearson, and David J. Howe. So you can order this for a limited time at lulu.com. It is a print on demand. It is a non-profit production, and I think the cost is around $28 a book. So it's really nice. It has a nice picture of Colin Baker on the front cover. If you remember in the last roundup, I talked about the Doctor Who, the Target Storybook hardcover, and they came out in November with a signed edition. So what's really cool is that it is signed by Colin Baker, Vinay Patel, Beverly Sanford, and Joy Wilkinson. And it is still in stock at ForbiddenPlanet.com. It is in pounds sterling, so if you want to get a hold of a copy, it's going to cost you roughly £16.99, if any are available. As of this taping, I just looked, it is now unavailable. Earlier today, there were a few copies left, so they're all gone. So my guess is to look for eBay. And if you're a fan of the David Bradley First Doctor, you have to get the First Doctor David Bradley life-size standee that you can order from amazon.co.uk. It is a life-size cutout at 38.11 £. It's from the Christmas special, multicolor. I don't have a size handy, but there are many other star cutouts you can get. But that one happened to come out in November, which I thought was really quite something. It's amazing. If you're a fan of Tomb of the Cybermen, you can get the Doctor Who mug, the keychain, or the coaster, which features the emblem that features on the great door that Toberman has to open. And you can get all of that at forbiddenplanet.com. Just skipping through here my list. Very, very big shout out to a friend of the podcast, Mr. Christos Achilleos, who did many of the wonderful artwork for the Target books. There is a book out called I've always wanted to have this. Kaklak? It's that saying on the front cover of the Dinosaur Invasion, which I've always wanted to make into a hashtag. I think it's a great thing. The Doctor Who art of Chris Achilleos, hardback and paperback. The hardback version is a limited edition and will not be released commercially, so you can only get it from candy-jar.co.uk. But the paperback will be out in bulk. So if you're a hardcore collector, you might want to grab that hardcover. I know I'm going to try to grab one myself. I'm a good friend of Chris Achilleos. He's a great guy. Anyway, moving backward, don't forget that Big Finish released a limited edition exclusive vinyl release of the story Max Warp, featuring the 8th Doctor. Unfortunately, it was limited only to 2,000 copies on a color vinyl disc, and I think it was set for one particular store in England. But you can find them on eBay. Be prepared to pay $50 on up. But those vinyl editions are really very nice, and just something that I enjoy listening to the vinyl Big Finishes. And I actually, if you listen to the Big Finish podcast, the Benji and Nick show, we don't do retakes here, and it's on every Sunday. A few episodes back, I did write in as the podcast asking about vinyls, and Nicholas Briggs addressed that really well, and I'm going to try to insert that clip here. This is what he said.
Simple as that. So first up, this one here from Larry Van Meersbergen. Dear Nick and Benji, love the podcast. Tried to send you an audio message but failed.
You did.
My question is more vinyl LP editions of Big Finish stories. Will more vinyl LP editions of Big Finish stories be made and offered in the USA? Thank you again, your fan Larry.
Well done. You almost read that out.
I know.
Yeah.
Incredible work.
Such a challengingly long email.
I know. Very complex. Very complex.
This is, Dear Bick and Wengie. Larry, all sorts of plans are afoot. But yes, we've been doing these exclusive deals with British supermarkets. Deals offered to us through the BBC, and but there's possibilities for all sorts of other things that we're looking into at the moment. Sorry to be vague. Our plans haven't solidified yet, but we are aware that it is frustrating for people who aren't in the right territory to get them. But it's sort of just a bit of fun as well for people to find them. But I know a lot of people have concerns that some people just buy them and put them straight on eBay and charge enormous amounts of money.
Such is the modern world.
I'm afraid it's really difficult to, as it were, legislate against that kind of behaviour. You can't we live in a free world, a free market world, and you can't restrict people doing stuff like that. At the same time, of course, it does feel slightly restrictive that people can't get hold of the vinyl, so that's a frustration as well. I mean, so we are mindful, and I personally am mindful of all those contradictions and difficulties, and we are putting our minds to finding a way through it that will end up being hopefully fairer for people in general. So please accept my apologies for any frustration caused by not being able to get hold of these vinyls, because they are superb. Shut up, Nick.
Always nice to be mentioned on that podcast. Also, coming back in November here, we had the Revelation of the Daleks, signed by the author, Eric Saward, which would, I believe, now complete the Doctor Who novelizations. It is the only classic era Doctor Who adventure not to be novelized, and now it's here with the original script editor in a hardcover edition. You can get this at forbiddenplanet.com, the signed copies. Otherwise, if you're not interested in a signed copy, you can still get them at amazon.com in the US or amazon.co.uk. Going backwards to the Revelation of the Daleks paperback, like I just said, is also there. If you're a vinyl person, and I think there's some really wonderful things here, the BBC Audio has limited to 500 copies, an exclusive edition of the vinyl edition of the Web Planet. And it is basically a themed Animus splatter vinyl, published for the first time on audio, starring William Hartnell as the Doctor. And I'm trying to see who is narrating this story here. I don't see it. It's just the original soundtrack. It's a wonderful thing to have. The exclusive edition has some extras. There's also a standard edition vinyl. They run anywhere from $100 on up. Lots of figurines were released. Doctor Who audio on CD. You can't miss this. Doctor Who and the Keeper of Traken is on audio, and it's narrated by Geoffrey Beevers, who portrayed the Master in actually the original. Oh, excuse me. No, I take it back. He played the Master in Keeper of Traken. The original, I believe, was Peter Pratt, I believe. I will double check that. Also, The Crotons has been released on audio CD, with Fraser Hines providing the linking narration. So if you love the audios, and I do, I have a long commute, so I do enjoy listening to those audios. Titan Comics came out with a few things. And by the way, the Fury from the Deep Steelbook should be shipping soon. So that represents the November Roundup. You can find out more about some of these things at our website, DoctorWhoCollectors.com. Visit our Facebook page at Doctor Who Collectors Podcast on either Twitter or Facebook. And if you have a question for the podcast or for me, you can certainly post that there, or you can message our site. We do accept messages on Facebook or Twitter, and of course through our website or through our email.
Money? My dear chap, I don't want money. I've got no use for the stuff.
And now it's time for the most outrageous offer. And this time the outrageous offer is a CD release. And this CD is released by Silva Screen from 1991. It is Doctor Who and the Pescatons, which was released on CD for a brief time. This particular seller is from France, and we don't have any other information here. However, they're asking for this CD in used good condition, which means there may be scratches and the cover may be damaged. For, in American dollars, $111.11. That's a lot of ones for this particular release. I do own the Pescatons in 3 different LP releases: the original Argo Records, the BBC Record Store Day re-release, and the Australian Book Club release, all valuable copies. The CD is a lot more common and not as collectible, except for those that really enjoy the story, which I think is a unique precursor into Big Finish, and has, live, performances with Tom Baker, Elizabeth Sladen. So you can actually get a copy of this CD on the same site from a seller in the United Kingdom for $19.72 plus shipping. So remember, the golden rule with the most outrageous offer is to shop around. If you have an offer, or actually I should say, if you've seen an outrageous offer, please let us know on our Facebook or Twitter page at Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, or our email, drwhocollectorspodcast@gmail.com, or you can fill out the form on our website at drwhocollectors.com. For the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, I am Larry Van Mersbergen, your host. Keep collecting.
Is this some sort of joke? No, I refuse to be treated in... What are you doing? Oh, stop! You're making me giddy.